The Embassy of the People's Republic of China in South Africa today hosts a symposium on the One China policy and the future of China-South Africa relations. It comes as tensions between China and Taiwan intensify. Taiwan prepares to inaugurate its new president, Lai Ching-te, while Beijing ramps up military and political pressure to assert its own sovereignty. Newzroom Afrika's Junior Kumalo is at the Chinese embassy and joins us now. We know that the final touches ahead of that news conference are being put in place. Junior, just tell us what's happening.
Indeed, Iman, the final touches are being put in place, so that's why we have to apologize for the sound in the background, because they were playing the various national anthems of South Africa and the People's Republic of China. But today's event is actually going to be a symposium between the Embassy of China in South Africa and officials from the ANC, as well as from the International Relations of South Africa. So it's just going to be discussions, as you've already said in that introduction, around the growing tensions between China and Taiwan, but also the trade relations between the two countries. China is South Africa's biggest trading partner, with the trading bilateral relations having started in 1998. At that time, the trading between the two countries was just over R1 billion, but since then it has grown to over 600 billion rands. So there's a big economic and political relations between the two countries. So we do expect these engagements to get underway at 10 o'clock, just boosting those trade relations. We know that the former ambassador of China to South Africa actually left South Africa 2 months ago. So those are some of the things that are going to be discussed when the new ambassador is going to be introduced to the country, and discussions around those, Iman.
A lot at stake then. We'll come back to Junior and where he's crossing to us from. It's a big issue because South Africa-China relations are important. So we'll talk about the breadth and scope of it and what some of the risks and the controversies are. And I'm joined by Brooks Spector, who is an international relations expert. Brooks, good morning to you. And it's lovely to talk to you. I haven't spoken to you in quite a while, so thank you very much for your time. I want to start with this One China policy, which sees Taiwan as part of a Chinese state represented by the People's Republic of China. Now, South Africa supports this policy, but share with our viewers why it has been so controversial and so conflictuous in diplomatic circles.
Well, the question, good morning, good to be with you too. The question of the circumstances of Taiwan actually is one of those remaining issues left over from the immediate World War II and World War II, when, as you recall, the nationalist Chinese government was pushed off the mainland by the Communist Party and its army at the end of the 1940s, but it didn't disappear entirely as a government. And as a result, it was supported and had relations with many nations around the world, including the United States until 1979, official, formal, and full, and was a member of the UN and a member of the Security Council representing China until the mid-1970s. The current circumstance is, of course, that Taiwan is a thriving democratic society of 26, 27 million people. And one of the most noteworthy features of it internationally, of course, is the companies on Taiwan that make the very high-end microchips, including, let me get the name of it right, the TSMC, the Taiwan Super Chip Manufacturing Corporation. Its products are found almost everywhere. If you go through your home, there'll be products from it. If you're in business, there'll be products. If you're in your studio, there are probably products of it pushed into the equipment all over the place. And as a result, Taiwan, even though it is not formally recognized by most nations in the world now as an independent state, represents a major international economic question. The Chinese, of course, have always argued that with the change in government in Beijing, Taiwan reverted to simply being a province of China as a whole, and they've pursued that ever since they came to power. And that's obviously one of the reasons why you're having the conference that you've referred to make that push further. Put this all in a larger perspective. The Chinese, like the Russians, like the European Union, like the United States, like a number of other countries, including some in the Middle East, have been increasingly hosting broad-based consultative conferences. The Americans, the U.S. Africa Leadership Conference that takes place usually every year. There are a couple of different versions of the Chinese such conference. The EU and Britain have them, the Russians have them, and all of that represents two sides of diplomacy, the substantive and the performative. The
Right.
performative is the kind of thing where you have a grand conference and there are communiques and handshakes and there's a wonderful dinner and there are lots of smiles and the obligatory photograph that's taken. The substantive is where there are questions of how to improve or increase trade relations or how to have a more consistent, mutually agreeable stance on an issue like climate change and so forth. One thing we should keep in mind, though, is that China, although it is engaged in this kind of push with a very strong effort, generally speaking, runs a trade balance in its favor with Africa. You see very few South African products other than raw materials exported to China. By contrast, Chinese manufactured items are ubiquitous. They are pretty much everywhere on this continent, and they range from shoes to high-end industrial equipment.
Yeah, as well as beef. Brooks, let me jump in there, and thank you very much, because I think you've given us a really important kind of distillation of just the scope of how we're interacting and which areas we are collaborating on. I want to quickly go to this. 2023 was a good year for China-Africa relations on a whole. There were some key milestones. South Africa is China's largest trading partner on the continent. And as our reporter was just reminding us, bilateral trade estimated at almost the 600 billion rand mark in 2022. Share more with us on the context of the collaboration between this nation, these two nations, and what it means in terms of this one China policy, given, as Beijing has already said to Taiwan, that any move to declare formal independence will be grounds for an attack on the island. So how much does it imperil the existing trade agreements going forward?
Well, if the Chinese were to actually militarily attack Taiwan, that would upend more than the trade relationship between South Africa or Africa and China. It would disturb the international strategic balance and economic balance, economic trade generally, by an enormous degree, probably even more than the way the Russian invasion of Ukraine has done so far, because the impact would be enormous and would have ripple effects pretty much everywhere. But going back to the first part of your comment, keep in mind, as I said earlier, the trade balance between South Africa and China continues to remain in China's favor. It's one thing to look at the total amount of trade. It's much more important, I think, to look at the balance between imports and exports and the constituent parts of trade. Most of what South Africa exports to China are raw materials, mostly rocks dug out of the ground, to put it one way. You see very few South African processed, high-end processed, value-added goods exported to China. That's partly a function of the way South Africa's economy is shaped, but it also is a function of the fact that the Chinese economy is an enormous consumer of raw materials from all kinds of places in many different circumstances for its production of manufactured items. One of the things that the South African government might well do would be to spend a lot more time pushing China to import higher end goods from South Africa, which there are things that could be exported in greater numbers. The trade balance, but to return back to the Taiwan question, if the Chinese were to in fact carry out such a threat as you've referred to, that would be presaged, that would be preceded by a range of strategic and military efforts to continue to press Taiwan. That is, overflights by military aircraft, greater push by naval vessels, increasing public statements. So far, to the best of my knowledge, no government on Taiwan has expressly and explicitly said we are going to create ourselves as an independent nation. Although if you look at public opinion polls from Taiwan, a significant portion, although not a majority, of the people of Taiwan would be in favor of such a thing. I think those are broad outlines to the kind of questions you were posing in your comment.
Brooks, thank you very much for that. And again, this conversation, this news conference a little bit later is going to be able to, again, add more detail on how this collaboration continues to unfold. Some of the other risks around labor practices, job displacement, environmental consequences, debt burden, financial stability, and so on, are well documented, and these are discussions that will be held ongoing. Brooks Spector, appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.